They say that even today, in the ruins of England, if torches burn at night, a reflection appears in the mirrors, the reflection of a laughing mad king. The king who once bent people to his will through fear, but in the end became a prisoner of his own punishment. If you had lived in the time of this king, would you have feared him, or would you have rebelled? Tell us in the comments. In the mist-covered lands of medieval England, there rose a king unlike any other. His name was King Alaric the Grim, though the people never dared call him by name. To them, he was simply the Bloody King. From the very first day of his reign, the kingdom trembled. Where most kings promised justice, Alaric promised fear. He believed mercy was weakness, and weakness meant the fall of an empire. His words echoed in the grand stone halls of his castle. Let them obey, or let them bleed. The people soon discovered that this was no empty threat. Alaric inherited the throne after his father's sudden death. Whispers in the court suggested poison, but none dared speak too loudly. Within weeks of his coronation, Alaric declared that any who spoke against his rule would suffer punishments never before seen by mankind. At first, the lords and nobles laughed in disbelief, but their laughter soon froze when the first punishment was revealed. A noble knight was accused of plotting rebellion. Instead of a sword or gallows, King Alaric ordered a giant wooden wheel built in the center of the capital square. The knight was tied to it, and slowly the wheel turned, breaking his bones one by one, while musicians played cheerful flutes to drown the man's cries. The crowd was forced to watch. Those who turned their heads were whipped. Alaric stood on his balcony drinking wine, smiling as though it were a festival. From that day, no one doubted his words again. Alaric's cruelty grew more creative with each passing year. When peasants protested against heavy taxes, he did not simply execute them. He transformed his royal gardens into what he called the Orchard of Obedience. There, he planted no fruit-bearing trees. Instead, he hung rebels from the branches, their bodies swaying in the wind like dark, rotten apples. He ordered his cooks to serve feasts beneath those trees, so visiting nobles would dine while corpses creaked overhead. The garden became infamous. Children whispered about it in terror, mothers prayed their sons would never be taken there, and travelers carried tales of the orchard where the trees bore men instead of fruit. But perhaps the most feared punishment of all was the cage of mirrors. For those accused of treason, Alaric had built an iron cage, lined from within with polished glass. Prisoners were locked inside, forced to stare endlessly at their own reflection. Torches burned day and night so they could never close their eyes. Some screamed, some tore at their own faces, and some laughed until they went mad. Alaric would visit the cage often. He would lean close and whisper, "You are your own executioner. I need only watch." It was said that no prisoner lasted more than 7 days before begging for death. Every punishment Alaric invented served a purpose. He wanted his people to believe that rebellion was not only dangerous, it was unthinkable. His cruelty became his crown, his terror became his throne. But deep inside the castle walls, shadows whispered. The queen, silent and pale, feared her husband more than the people did. His own counselors trembled when they handed him scrolls. Even the guards refused to meet his eyes. The Bloody King had no friends, only servants. And servants, no matter how fearful, always whisper when the torches go out. To celebrate the 10th year of his reign, Alaric announced a grand festival. The people, starving and weary, hoped for mercy. Perhaps food, perhaps pardons. Instead, the king unveiled his greatest spectacle. He gathered prisoners from across the realm, thieves, rebels, and even children accused of petty crimes. In the heart of the capital, an enormous arena was built. The prisoners were thrown inside, and wild beasts, lions, wolves, even bears, were released to tear them apart. The crowd was ordered to cheer. Those who refused were dragged into the arena themselves. That night, the blood soaked the ground so deeply that no rain ever washed it clean again. Travelers later called it the day the earth remembered. Yet no king, however cruel, rules forever without opposition. Deep in the countryside, far from the bloody king's gaze, rebels began to rise. They whispered of freedom, of vengeance, of ending Alaric's reign of terror. They were poor farmers, desperate mothers, and runaway soldiers. But their hatred was sharper than any sword. The king, of course, learned of them. His spies brought him news of a growing rebellion. And so, Alaric devised punishments more terrible than ever before. He swore that he would not only break their bodies, but also crush their very souls. And so begins the final chapter of the bloody king's reign. In the dark corners of the kingdom, where the king's armies grew weaker, rebellion began to rise. Poor farmers gathered secretly at night, carrying sickles and shovels in their hands. They did not wield swords, but their hearts burned with fire. Hungry mothers, instead of feeding their children, made them swear an oath. We will rise against Alaric, even if it costs our lives. These whispers slowly grew into a storm. But the king, too, had devised new ways to crush rebellion. Alaric announced that whoever was caught in revolt would be seated on the throne of fire. It was an iron chair beneath which burning coals were lit. Prisoners were bound to it, their flesh sizzling against the heated iron. But for Alaric, death was never enough. He wanted people not just to die, but to become a spectacle. He ordered that the townsfolk be dragged by force to witness these fiery executions. The people wept and screamed, but the king only smiled. He declared, "When they burn, the kingdom grows stronger." Another punishment he created was called the Field of Thorns. Prisoners were forced barefoot across sharp brambles and thorny vines. Those who collapsed were left to bleed until death claimed them. It is said that one night, Alaric even punished his own soldiers this way, just because they had dozed off during their watch. The men crawled, screaming, across the bloody thorns, while the king laughed loudly at their agony. But there is always a limit to tyranny. The more blood he spilled, the more fury burned in the hearts of the people. The rebels formed a secret brotherhood, swearing to dethrone the bloody king once and for all. Their leader was a farmer named Edwin. His wife and child had been hanged in the king's so-called Garden of Obedience. That day, Edwin raised a sword and vowed, "The time has come for this throne to drown in blood." When Alaric heard that rebellion had grown into an army, he devised a grand festival to reignite fear. For this, he prepared his most horrifying punishment yet, the Iron Eagle. It was a massive iron bird with wings lined with sharp blades. Prisoners were locked inside it, and a fire was lit beneath. As the iron grew red-hot, the screams of the victims echoed through the bird's beak, like a monstrous eagle shrieking across the night. At this festival, many rebels were burned alive in the eagle. But the crowd remained silent. Their faces were hard. Fear no longer ruled them. Hatred did. Days later, the rebel army marched toward the capital. Farmers, laborers, women, children. Few had weapons, but all were armed with rage. The king's soldiers guarded the gates, but many despised him as much as the people did. Some opened the gates, others handed their weapons to the rebels. Inside the palace, blood was spilled, yet all had one goal: to reach the king. When Edwin stormed into the throne room, he found Alaric sitting on his blood-stained throne. The king was laughing, as if it were all a play. "Alaric, you think you've won? No. This happened because I willed it. Fear never dies." Edwin raised his blade. "Edwin, today your fear ends." The rebels decided the king would suffer the same punishments he had invented. For him, they built the Cage of Mirrors. Alaric was locked inside. But this time, the people came not by force, but willingly, eager to watch. For 7 days, he stared into his own reflections. He screamed, he laughed, and slowly, madness devoured him. On the 8th day, they found his corpse, eyes wide open, lips frozen in a twisted smile. After his death, the people set fire to his throne and threw the bloody crown into the River Thames. Edwin refused to wear the crown. He declared, "We do not need another king. We need justice." Thus ended the reign of the bloody monarch, whose kingdom had been built on terror and punishment, and destroyed by the hands of the very people he sought to enslave.